Next discussion, our next speaker, Brian Woodward. Brian, who holds a PhD, is the Regional Forest Advisor for the Santa Cruz Mountains, including Santa Cruz, Santa Clara, and San Mateo counties. He leads a forest management and ecology research and extension program addressing the challenges facing landowners, industry, nonprofit, and government forest property owners in the Santa Cruz Mountains. His research and extension is centered around coast redwood forest management, utilization, conservation and restoration, wildfire resilience, ecological monitoring, and insects and disease. Welcome, Brian.
Good. Thanks for having me. Cool. Sounds great. Thanks, Bonnie. All right, good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me. It's good to see you all out here on this rainy day. I'm going to start with the bad news, and that's what my talk is on, an invasive species that was recently detected in our area. With the good news, however, I think that we're at a point in this infestation that there's a real opportunity for us to prevent further spread into our community, as well as for you all to contribute. So I'm here today to talk about the invasive shothole borer, which is a group of insects that has been present in California for a little over a decade, but we have a new detection for a new species here in the San Lorenzo watershed. So invasive shothole borers are really small insects. They're like the size of a sesame seed, but it's kind of a power in numbers situation. So they have really fast population growth that can result in really intensive effects in urban parks as well as riparian areas. So what do they look like? There's 2 different species, or at least there used to be 2 different species. There's now 3 different species in California, and I'll go over that in a bit. It's an insect disease complex. So this is a beetle that carries a fungus. It has a symbiotic relationship with a fungus. It carries it on its body throughout its life cycle. And it's actually the fungus that results in the most immediate impacts on our forest systems. So the beetle actually introduces this fungus into the tree, and that results in the inability of a tree to transport nutrients and water throughout its main stems. The 2 species are morphologically identical. They're almost impossible to distinguish between, except using DNA analysis. One of the main characteristics that separates them is actually the species of fungus that they carry on their body. And just to show you just how small these insects are, it's a penny in the background, sorry, and on the left is a male shothole borer, and on the right is a female. On the far right, you can see the impacts that this pest, this disease complex can have on individual trees. So you often see dieback of individual trees and then clusters of trees, often starting at the top, and it can result in full tree mortality in some cases. So where is this beetle located? So for the last decade, it's been primarily located in Southern California. And then about 2 years ago, it was discovered in San Jose, and then now we have a new species here in Santa Cruz County. It's moved primarily through wood waste, so whether it be packaging material or yard waste or firewood. We don't really know how it got to Santa Cruz County or San Jose. We thought the progression from Los Angeles up to Santa Cruz would be quite a bit slower than it was, but all it took was 1 truckload full of firewood to bring it into an all new area. What's pretty wild about this insect, and why I actually have developed a respect for it over time, is because it has this very interesting life cycle. We often say to start a new infestation that it only takes 1 beetle. And you might say, well, that doesn't really make biological sense, that only takes 1 beetle, but because of this unique life cycle, that's all it takes. If you have 1 beetle in a branch or in a piece of firewood, it can result in a new infestation. And that's because this beetle spends the vast majority of its life within a boring hole in a tree. And when it leaves, it's already pregnant. So the female that exits the hole is already pregnant. It transfers over to a new suitable host, and often that's a host that's the same host that it was born on. So they don't move very far. They're kind of they're poor flyers. They kind of flop around in the wind. So they find a new suitable host. They bore into the tree, and they already have that fungus that they use for their nutrition to raise up for their offspring as well. They grow that up into the tunnel that they bore into the hole. And they lay eggs, and the eggs are dominated by females with few males. The larvae then feed exclusively on that fungus. They don't feed on the wood. They don't have to leave the hole to get any of their nutrition. They can just stay right in that hole that they're born in. They grow up, and then the very unique thing about them is they mate with their siblings. So there's no need for them to leave for food, for reproduction, until they're ready to move on to a new host. So it's kind of this closed system. They're also really unique because, they kind of plug the hole closed as well on the outside of the tree. So they're very difficult they don't have a lot of, natural enemies. A woodpecker or something is not gonna solve this problem, unfortunately. The life cycle continues quite rapidly. They can have multiple generations per year. That results in really rapid population growth. They live in quite warm environments, so they've only been found really in coastal environments in California. That enables them to, rapidly reproduce. So after just 5 or 6 generations, a single tree can have hundreds of thousands of beetles. And that's what we call an amplifier tree. So this is a tree that's been heavily infested by the beetles. And as I said, they don't like to move very far. They have the ability to, if they catch the wind, fly up to 2 miles, but typically they fly about 2 feet. So what are the signs and symptoms of the invasive shothole borer? The first is this kind of staining, and this is how we first noticed it in Santa Cruz County, up in panel A there. And then there's also this kind of gumminess, kind of looks like maple syrup on the outside of a tree. And then panel C is what we call sugary volcanoes. It's a sugary exudate that results when the tree is defending itself from the beetle. And then the characteristic sign is this shothole. So it's a really perfectly round hole. A lot of our native beetles don't create a round hole. So that's a really telltale sign or symptom if you see this, these 4 characteristics, or just one of these 4 characteristics combined with that circular entry hole that's about the size of a ballpoint pen. There's a good chance that it might be shothole borer. So what does this result in over time? It's called Fusarium dieback. This is a really extreme example down in the Tijuana River Valley. But this is an area that panel A is May 2015, and that's a willow-dominated system. And it goes to show you that, how intense this can be if populations of these beetles are unmanaged. Panel B is just 1 year later, resulting in nearly 100% mortality of willow in this system. Like I said, there's not a lot of examples of it being this intense, but it's just an example of how intense it really can be. A picture there on the right is actually from Henry Cowell Redwood State Park. That's an amplifier tree that has thousands of holes. That's a box elder. It may have been one of the first trees that was infested here in Santa Cruz County. The lower image shows you what the fungal growth looks like in the tissue of the tree. As you can see, as the fusarium spreads out within the tree, it can prevent the transport of water and nutrients through the healthy tissues of the tree. So what species are susceptible? It's another thing that makes this pest so unique and so successful. There's over 80 species of trees that are present in California in urban environments, and well over 20 native species of trees that shothole borer will infest. So it's a pretty non-selective pest as well. So in urban environments like parks, there can be really intensive impacts as a result of invasive shothole borer. It does have a favorite tree, and that is box elder, which in Southern California is a really common landscape tree. But here in Santa Cruz County, it's a species that dominates certain areas of our riparian systems, particularly up near Felton in the San Lorenzo watershed. So that's the box elder, being one of the kind of the ice cream species, we call it, the species that it really will preferentially attack first if it's present in the environment. So I got a call maybe a year and a half ago or so, and UC Cooperative Extension had a training on invasive shothole borer over in San Jose for arborists because of the recent detection there. And just a few weeks later, I got a call that there was potentially invasive shothole borer up along the Zianti Trail in Henry Cowell Redwood State Park. So this is the exact picture I received in the email, actually, and you can see those telltale signs, the staining, the gumming, the kind of sugary exudate present there. It looked a lot like invasive shothole borer, but quickly we realized that the exit holes were actually about twice the size of the typical size of invasive shothole borer, and sent in samples, and it actually ended up being the greater shothole borer. So not a great first to have, but this is Felton represents the first place that this beetle's been found in Western North America. And it's also it's the only place that we know it currently exists in California as well. So not a great first thing to be, but that's just the fact of it, unfortunately. What makes this beetle different? It's about twice the size, so that's why it's got the larger entry and exit hole. It also carries a different fungus than the other two species. So we've got three separate species of shothole borer and 3 separate species of fungus present now in California. The polyphagous shothole borer and the Kuroshio shothole borer, which are present in Southern California and in San Jose, are not present in Santa Cruz County. With that said, there's nothing that precludes from those beetle species from infesting similar environments like those that are infested by the greater shothole borer currently. So there can be overlap, and there's examples of that in Southern California. And that kind of compounding disturbance can be really impactful. There's a great fact sheet that's been put together on this that's available at ishb.org, and that's the fact sheet on the right there. So there it is in comparison to the other two shothole borer species that are present. And then you can see the entry hole. So we often say for the KSHB and PSHB, the two species that have been present for over a decade in California, we often say that it's the very tip of the ballpoint pen, but you can see there the hole, that pretty much the entire tip of the ballpoint pen goes into the hole. So it's quite a bit larger. With that said, it's got that characteristic perfect shot hole, perfectly round entry hole that really separates it from other species like the western hookbark borer, for example. And then the indicator the indicator symptoms are really the same. So it's got the staining, the frass, which is basically sawdust, sugary exudate, and then dieback happens very similarly as well. So where is this beetle in Santa Cruz County? When I took the first sample of it up in Felton, I was really optimistic that we could probably contain it within that region, but unfortunately we did catch this infestation a little bit late. So we think that the Zianti Trail probably had the invasive shothole borer present for 5 or more years before we actually found it. And it's really just, as the outbreak becomes more intensive, the signs and symptoms become more obvious. And it just took a trained eye to finally see it, to show us that it was present in that area. Since then, we've been doing really intensive monitoring, both in the area of Felton, but also less intensively throughout the San Lorenzo, from Felton down to Santa Cruz. And we found it at Paradise Park last year with a heavily infested amplifier tree, and then later in the in the summer we found it at the Tannery Arts Center. But that's a really light infestation. There's only 1 or 2 trees that have been found with a few entry holes. But it just goes to show you, how rapidly this beetle can develop this population and move throughout the watershed. The thing about the greater shothole borer is we're really still learning because we're this first, we're the first place in the Western North America to have this beetle. We really don't know much about it. So we can make some assumptions that it's similar to the other 2 species, but there's almost certainly some host preferences, or the trees that it attacks that are going to vary between species. We know it has a really similar life cycle, but we still don't know how rapidly it can spread. We don't know the range of tree species that it might attack, and we don't know the exact distribution in Santa Cruz County. So that's something that the Agricultural Commissioner, in cooperation with UC Cooperative Extension, we're probably going to have a much better picture over the next year or so, because we're going to start intensive monitoring this season. So we know that the greater shothole borer also preferentially attacks box elder. If you go up to the Zion Trail and walk around, you'll see that the vast majority of trees that it's attacking are that box elder. But there's also examples of it attacking California sycamore, black cottonwood, and then multiple willow species. And there's also a few attacks that seem mostly unsuccessful, kind of superficial attacks on coast live oak as well. So what are some of the effects that it can have on the watershed, and how is it moving through these systems? It seems to be spotty. So in comparison to that Tijuana River Valley photo I showed you, it's kind of killing 1 tree here and 1 tree there. With that said, it's across a really broad region. So the mortality is fairly intensive within Henry Cowell Redwood State Park, but as you move further down and towards Santa Cruz, you just see a tree here, a tree there that's affected. And we don't know if that's because there's so many suitable hosts present in our system and the population just hasn't grown to a place where it can have really intensive effects at the landscape scale, or if because it's just not as voracious of an insect as the other 2 species that are present in California. But some of the effects that this could have on the system obviously are primarily related to canopy loss, but also woody cover. So there's potential for stream bank erosion and sedimentation and increased stream temperatures, hazardous trees in parks and in the wildland-urban interface. Something that makes our infestation unique is that a lot of the infestations in Southern California have been present in urban parks. And ours is present primarily in a wildland area, so that makes it very difficult to manage in comparison to, say, if you were just in the middle of an urban park and you could implement some of the management practices that we have present for these species. So with all that said, how are we responding, and how can you help? I do want you to know that there's a really great group of people that are responding to this from an institutional level, from where is it in really low populations and how can we manage those trees to knock it back, and then also preventing further spread, so not moving that woody material from one place to the next. So the first thing is, as I mentioned, we've been monitoring throughout the region. That's where we've figured out the kind of epicenter with a number of partners, and that area probably looks familiar to many of you, but Felton Covered Bridge County Park has many trees that have been attacked, as well as Henry Cowell Redwood State Park. So that's where it really probably started, and it's moved down watershed from there. Further up in the watershed, it actually doesn't have as many suitable host species. It kind of transitions from the box elder habitat into a bay laurel dominated system, and there's no evidence that bay laurel is susceptible to the shothole borer whatsoever. So management of this species really focuses on these amplifier trees. And an amplifier tree is a tree that has greater than 150 entry or exit holes. So that means it's harboring, many hundreds or thousands of beetles. So monitoring efforts need to focus on mapping and identifying these amplifier trees so that they can be prioritized for. Unfortunately, removal is the primary way that you can prevent the spread. Removal and then reduction, or I'm sorry, grinding up the woody material. We're focusing, or we plan to focus our monitoring efforts on areas that are dominated by box elder. So those are areas that are displayed in red in the map. It kind of just is a good first snapshot as to whether this has moved across to additional regions in the Santa Cruz County that are susceptible to this host. But where I think we have a lot of opportunity, but also what sometimes keeps me up at night a little bit, is the potential for this pest to move into the city of Santa Cruz. Tannery Arts Center is right at the edge, so I really think we should be managing that infestation very actively, and that we should also be doing considerable monitoring and trying to capture any movement from the Tannery Arts area down into the city of Santa Cruz, because there's so many species that we know are susceptible, and the impacts that it can have in places like city parks, can permanently change the landscape in those areas through intensive mortality. So the way that we manage these infestations is typically you find these amplifier trees and you remove the tree and you grind up that material, including the stump, into the smallest particle size that you possibly can. So if you remove a tree and grind it up into 1-inch pieces, you can kill about 100% of the beetles. If you grind it up into 3-inch pieces, which is more typical with a typical chipper, you can still reduce the population by 98%. So it's a really effective strategy. And once again, these are just the trees that are heavily infested. The idea is slowing the spread rather than eradication. And there's considerable evidence that, going after these amplifier trees can have really huge effects on reducing that population and preventing the spread across further areas. So it's kind of, sacrificing one for the benefit of many when it comes to the management of this pest. There's also some, cultural as well as chemical treatments that are present in this that are suitable for this pest, but that's really only in urban environments. It's really not something suitable to be used in riparian areas where the majority of this infestation is. So what can we do? Primary thing is we really don't want to be moving wood in Santa Cruz County. So if you have any idea that you might have an infested tree on your property, make sure that you don't just cut it up and put it in your green waste bin, because then it'll be going to the landfill and spreading across Santa Cruz and further. Don't move firewood. That's very likely how this pest got here in the first place. We don't know how it made it up to Felton. It seems kind of like a strange place to me for an infestation to start for the first place in Western North America, but that's where it is. So we'll probably never know how it actually got to Felton. It's also really important that you take good care of your trees on your property, because like most pests and pathogens, weakened individuals are really highly susceptible to this pest versus healthy and vigorous trees. Another way you can help is we have an iNaturalist monitoring program, so I really encourage you all to dig into this topic a little bit more. We have all types of training materials available for you to learn about this pest and pathogen and to contribute to the monitoring of it in this area. So if you go to ishp.org or reach out to me directly, I'd be happy to put you in touch with the training, or with some of our trainings that are planned in the near future. We have a lot of fantastic resources. We're lucky in the sense that while we have a new species, this is something that my colleagues throughout California have been working on for over a decade. So we've got a lot of information that's valuable to us here. So with that, I want to thank you all, and I might have time for a question or two.
Thank you so much. I live at the tannery, and we have box elders, and I'm wondering if those were the trees that you found them on there, do you know?
Yeah, so at the tannery, there's only 1 or 2 box elders that are infested there, but yes, right behind the pathway there.
Do you have any intentions of removing them, or are they not at that stage?
So that's something that we're working on with the local partners. You know, for cooperative extension, I don't make any management decisions. I simply convey best management practices. So something that we're certainly in conversation with the local partners that manage that area.
Is there some way to make sure that we can be in touch with people who are doing that, because we monitor the events ourselves? Anyway, I know we're running out of time, but I sure did want to touch bases with you.
Yeah, absolutely. You can reach out. Anyone can reach out to me anytime about monitoring, training. If you find a new infestation, I'm a good person to contact, either me or the agricultural commissioner. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.